This is breaking news.
Action that they're taking in the Bronx to remediate some of these potential issues from a diversion of traffic, but we're not seeing it here in New Jersey. We're not seeing the consideration to our citizens, our constituents, and the potential impacts that will have on them. Further, when you think about this as an environmental piece, there's no corresponding piece to alleviate congestion here in New Jersey and in our communities and what the new traffic patterns will have. Look it, this is today without congestion pricing. Now, if people want to go down to Exchange Place or Newport to take the path, this traffic will go through our neighborhoods. It will impact our neighborhoods, and there's no other way around it. The challenge with congestion pricing is twofold. It's a revenue shift from the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey to the MTA. There's no other way around it. Now, the Port Authority, as you all know, is a bi-state agency, so it takes into consideration New York, New Jersey, the entire region. But when you shift that revenue to the MTA, you see in all of their literature, it's about New York residents. It's not about New Jersey residents, not about Connecticut residents. It's not even really about the outer boroughs. It's about Manhattan. It's about residents of the Central Business District. If you take that money away from the Port Authority, in the next capital campaign, you're talking about potentially not being able to fund a brand new bus terminal, which would get cars off the road. You may not be able to fund expanded path service, which would get people out of their cars into mass transit. So how are you going to shift revenue and say, this is about the environment, this is about mass transit, if you're not showing anything on this side of the ledger for New Jersey? Now, I'll give you a simple solution. If the MTA is serious, and this is not a revenue shift to fund their projects, but about the region, about how we get people out of cars today, moving forward, simple solution. Expand the 7 line to Secaucus Junction Station here in New Jersey. It would be an MTA asset. It would connect New Jersey, New York, give people another option, single seat to get from New Jersey all the way to the east side. If they are serious about getting cars off the road, they would spend every single dollar from this project on the expansion of the 7 line. But I guarantee you, they will not take that into consideration, because they're not looking for real solutions to their challenge. They're looking to fund an underfunded MTA. That's what this is about. So if they're serious, show me a real solution. There's one that they already have. New York City has already invested in this project. If they're serious, we're serious about working together. But until then, we're not going to let them shift revenue from a bi-state agency to the MTA to New York City. We won't stand for it. And on that note, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing my colleague, who's been a leader on this issue and always fights New Jersey, for his constituents, Josh Gottheimer.
Thanks, man. Thanks. I feel like we're in the middle of a street crossing right here. Yeah. Thanks. First of all, it is great to be back in Jersey City. It's great to be here with my very good friend and phenomenal leader for this district, Rob Menendez, who, if you have not spent enough time with, you got to spend more time with, because no one fights harder for the families of Essex County, for the families in Hudson County, and they're very lucky to have Rob as their new voice in Congress. And I want to thank Rob for his fight, for standing here today and standing up for hardworking middle-class families up against New York's absurd $23 a day proposed congestion tax. As many of you know, this past Friday, without conducting a full environmental impact study, the U.S. Department of Transportation blindsided families across Jersey and New York, allowing the MTA to take the next step with their cash-grabbing, anti-environment congestion tax plan. That's why we're here today, to make sure the Department of Transportation hears the voices of the hardworking middle-class commuters who will be forced to pay this absurd $23 a day, $5,000 a year congestion tax, and to listen to those voices of young children whose health will be harmed directly by the increased air pollution the congestion tax will cause. Yet, rather than listen to those families, including the 75% of those who testified in the hearings against the congestion tax, the U.S. Department of Transportation is choosing to ignore the facts that the MTA submitted to the federal government in their own reports about the serious environmental effects of congestion pricing. You heard me right. In the MTA's own report last year, they admitted to the Department of Transportation that the congestion tax will not only cause more traffic here at the Hudson Tunnel and at the Lincoln Tunnel and the GW Bridge, but that it will also have a serious impact on air pollution affecting our children and families. Now, the DOT's response to all this was unbelievable. Don't bother submitting a more in-depth environmental impact study. It's what they said last week. Little odd for an administration that claims to be committed to protecting the environment. A little odd for us, given how committed we both are to protecting the environment. As the New York Times reported on March 28th, let me be specific about the MTA's own admissions. Again, you can read this story in the New York Times. It'll give it a little more color. The MTA acknowledges in their report to the federal government that if their congestion tax program goes into effect, there will be more cars diverted here at the tunnel and the trucks to northern New Jersey by the GW Bridge and to the outer boroughs just outside the tolling zone, hurting lower income families. Again, that's in the MTA's report. The MTA said the Bronx alone could face 700 more trucks every day and countless more trucks by Fort Lee and in northern New Jersey. As a result, the MTA estimates in their report that there will be increases in traffic, pollutants, and mobile air toxins through 2045 in the Bronx, Staten Island, Nassau County, and Bergen County. Specifically, according to the MTA's report, there will be increases in particulate matter, nitrogen oxide, and carbon monoxide in Bergen County, as well as toxins like formaldehyde in the outer boroughs and in northern New Jersey. You heard me right, in formaldehyde. Again, they admit this in the MTA's own report that they submitted to the federal government. This isn't some made-up thing. If you'd like, I'll give you the page numbers separately. I got them here. In the Bronx alone, they predict that the diverted traffic will increase soot from truck traffic by about 5%. The MTA's environmental assessment is 900 pages long. I get it. It takes a long time to read. I hope the federal government actually read it. But these are just a few of the most egregious findings on how the congestion tax will hurt the environment. It's an anti-environment proposal. I'm happy again to get you the page numbers. The negative environmental impacts on families will be so bad that the MTA is prepared to spend, ready for this, and Rob alluded to this, $130 million from tolling to try to mitigate the effects of the pollutants in the Bronx and parts of the outer borough. How much for New Jersey's pollution? Not a nickel for New Jersey. Their proposed solutions include having to install new air filtration units near schools, more vegetation, and spending $25 million on asthma treatment programs in New York. Absurd. So they admit it's so bad that they actually have to put $25 million for asthma treatment programs. That's how bad the congestion tax will be on our children. Because of the congestion tax moving pollution elsewhere, they're going to have to set up this asthma program. If that's not environmental guilt on New York's MTA's conscience, I don't know what is. Again, this is not our offices creating these stats. It's from the MTA and their 900-page report themselves, from a mismanaged organization that will literally do anything for an extra buck. Anything to stem the bleeding of their woefully mismanaged organization that a New York judge called, quote, an orgy of overtime fraud. Even Governor Hochul recently acknowledged the congestion tax is part of her, quote, plan to rescue the MTA, right? They admit it's just about cash. The MTA is losing $2 billion a year and blew all $15 billion they received from the federal government during the pandemic. Studies show that last year they lost about $500 million, the MTA, to fare skippers, people who just decided to ride and not to pay, right? And now they want us in Jersey to pick up the tab to help stop the bleeding into the MTA's outrageous black hole, right? It's literally a black hole. New York State under Governor Hochul, instead of focusing dollars toward helping out the MTA, she actually approved $600 million to go toward building a new stadium for the Buffalo Bills. I love football. I love the Giants. I love football. But really, shouldn't you take that $600 million if you've got such a problem with the MTA and help the MTA instead of turning to Jersey and saying, oh, why don't you all, your families, your hardworking nurses, labor, right? Why don't you guys pick up the cost for our problems? That's what New York is saying to Jersey. So what do? We sound the alarm on the negative environmental impacts of the proposed congestion tax. I will be submitting a formal comment this week, because there's a 30-day comment period, demanding that the Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration reconsider their anti-environmental decision. They should ask the MTA for a full environmental impact study. It just makes sense. When you know all the environmental impacts, potential environmental impacts from the congestion tax, wouldn't the federal government want to have a full, in-depth study? Doesn't that just make sense? The DOT has a 30-day public review period to make this right and order a full environmental impact of the MTA's proposed congestion tax. Here in Jersey and the outer boroughs, we have 30 days of public review to get comments in to the DOT. We plan to fight. We plan to fight hard over the next 30 days and beyond. That's what we do in Jersey when someone's trying to stick it to us. Governor Murphy has already indicated that the state is looking at legal options, and of course you can turn to the state and to Governor Murphy's office for more details. I'll be working closely with my colleagues, Democrats like the incredible leader here, Rob Menendez, and my Republican House colleagues from Jersey and New York as part of the Anti-Congestion Tax Caucus to move expeditiously on this review, on looking at this review, and of course, two pieces of legislation that we've introduced. The Anti-Congestion Tax Act, which will freeze federal dollars sent each year to the MTA if they move forward. That's about $2 billion a year the MTA gets from the federal government if the agency insists on barreling ahead with this $23 a day plan. It will also amend the U.S. tax code to offer commuters a federal tax credit at the end of the year equal to the amount they paid in the congestion tax. That will protect New Jersey and New York drivers from this absurd tax. Nicole Malliotakis and I have also introduced legislation demanding a full audit of the MTA to figure out what they did with the $15 billion they received from the federal government during the pandemic. Where did it all go? They're allowing fare skippers to $500 million a year. Is that how they run their agency? I think the country deserves to know, especially if they're turning to Jersey to bail them out. Again, you couldn't ask for stronger advocates of mass transit, as you heard Rob talk about, with what he wants here for his constituents. The bipartisan infrastructure bill, I helped write that and pass it. That's all about more money for mass transit, more resources for New Jersey Transit. Those are important to help build the Gateway train tunnel. We want to reduce pollution. The congestion tax will increase pollution. We want to help families commuting, whether that's from Vernon, New Jersey, Sussex County, Warren County, where there are no mass transit options, Bergen County, where there aren't enough mass transit options. But the idea to turn around $23 a day, plus the $17 to go through this tunnel, plus gas, plus parking for hardworking families is out of the question. It's completely outrageous. We just simply can't afford it. And last thing I want to say, Rob Menendez was on the Port Authority board. He did a phenomenal job. Nobody in our delegation understands the Port Authority like he does, and the impacts this could have on the capital projects, right? You're talking about things like the new proposed bus terminal in New York City, resources for the PATH train, work at LaGuardia and Newark and Kennedy airports, the port, the aging GW bridge. You're talking, by their own estimations, we believe there'll be $1 billion impact from congestion tax on the Port Authority's capital project plan. So what do we do with that? How do we fill that new hole that's suddenly found? The MTA is basically literally robbing Peter to pay Paul to boost the revenue for the MTA. I'd like to understand what they're going to do about the Port Authority. So with that, I just want to say we're going to keep fighting this over the next 30 days. We're going to keep fighting the cash-grabbing MTA. I urge Mr. Lieber and the MTA to reconsider. We urge the U.S. Department of Transportation, the Federal Highway Administration, to reconsider and to actually study the full impacts on the environment, on our children, and our families. In the greatest country in the world, it's the least we can do. We got to work together. I know that if we do, our best days will always be ahead. God bless. Thank you. Any questions for us? Rob, your town, you want to lead it?
So, there's a lot of tolls on roads in New Jersey. I work in New York super often, but, a lot of roads in this state have tolls on them. Do you think that the city of New York should be able to control the usage of its own roads? And if not, do you think that they should get rid of the tolls on the turnpike and other highways?
Well, of course, I also drive a lot in New York. It's a great place. And if you go outside the city and to upstate, Westchester, and all those areas, you pay tolls as well to use those roads. You're talking about here a major artery, and there's already a toll, and I don't know if you agree, there's already a toll right here at $17 that we split between New York and New Jersey to use each other's areas, right? New York drivers come here to New Jersey drivers go into New York City, right? There's already a tolling system for that. It's the Port Authority. It's more than 100 years old, and we've already worked that out. You go out of the area, of course, there's other tolls, but I assume we're talking about the artery here, where 20% of the GDP in the United States of America runs through this artery, and it's always been a cooperative relationship.
Yeah, I would just add that there's a federal component too to putting into place congestion pricing. So it's not just a New York, New Jersey, New York City toll. It has a federal component as well. So we should have a voice as part of the federal government into what happens here. So it's not just a New York City thing. There's a federal component. So a little bit different on the way you pose the question.
I'll ask the flip of that. Has New Jersey decided to get catty and add more tolls for people coming here from New York?
I think we would both defer to the governor of New Jersey for that question, but you should ask.
But I wouldn't refer to it as catty. We want to be productive. We want to be productive and create solutions that benefit the region, both New York and New Jersey. The Port Authority's led on that. So the way the MTA is structured, this would only benefit the MTA. So what we're looking to do is have a real robust conversation about the impacts that this has on both New Jersey and New York. It's been a silent part of the conversation on what happens to New Jersey, both from an environmental standpoint, especially when we don't know how traffic is going to change, and then also from how do we create a better mass transit system. So if we're left out of that conversation, I don't see how that's productive and gets to a real strong solution.
Yeah, just to add one thing to that, because I think the Congressman's making a phenomenal point here. We've had a very productive relationship with the Port Authority for 100 plus years, right? Where we work together on the regional traffic, on bridges, on roads, on tunnels, on the airports, the port, in a very productive relationship. Out of nowhere, New York City wakes up and says, you know what, we got problems here. By the way, we've got issues in New Jersey too, and we can't solve them on our own. And our MTA is so mismanaged, we can't literally keep up. So let me look around, let me see who we can figure out we can stick it to. Oh, our friends over there in Jersey. We'll just stick it to hardworking families over there, to the nurse over there who's got to commute, right? We'll just stick it to her, right? And that's basically what they've woken up and said. They did it on their own unilaterally, didn't talk about the impact it actually had, and then they started by saying, oh, this would be good for congestion, right, to reduce traffic and to reduce pollution. Then as time goes on, they do their own study, they're like, uh-oh, it doesn't actually reduce pollution, it doesn't actually reduce traffic, right? Whether that's north of 60th Street, whether it's more cars at the tunnels, more trucks at the bridge, our plan's not gonna do that. And then they shift their message and go, listen, we just need the cash, right? And that's what Governor Hochul has said, right? She shifted her message. She said, now, we just need the $1 billion. We need the money. And so who are we going to turn to? Oh, Jersey, they'll have to pay because they have no options but to, a lot of them, but to drive in. So they're going to have to pay the money. We need the $1 billion. So we'll take it, right? They're not even considering the impact on the Port Authority. They're not considering the impact on their own businesses in New York City, right? The small business in New York City have all come out against this. Why? Because they know it's going to reduce traffic to the south of 60th area. It's going to be devastating impact on their businesses. That's how little they care about their own businesses in New York City and trying to get people back to New York City. That's how desperate they are for cash, and that's how much they want to pick the pockets of our hardworking families here in Jersey.
Just one last thing that I think you should all think
We got
about
time, we'll answer you.
Is that if you look at the for-hire vehicle component of this, if you're really serious about getting cars out of Central Business District, you would have an entirely different approach to for-hire vehicles, which they do not. So instead of getting those vehicles out of the Central Business District, pushing people onto mass transit, they're not, in my opinion, they're not serious about a real conversation about how we solve the challenges that we're facing here and in New York.
Definitely.
Well, I think there's, as you know, a multitude of options in terms of what the fare structure would be, potential rebates, etc. But we're looking at over $100 million a year. I think that's a baseline start. I think it's going to be north of that because you got to remember, New York City wants this because they want cash in their pocket. So all these estimates, in my opinion, are going to be on the lower end. So we're looking at a significant capital shift from the Port Authority to the MTA, and it's something that I think does a disservice to this region.
Yeah, and that's the number we have, about $1.25 billion over 10 years.
Which, as you know, then affects our capital capacity to borrow against it because that's revenue that you no longer have to bond against. So it's a multiplier impact from that base number.
And then I know Rob understands it better than me, but then you either have to make up that hole, either you cancel projects or you have to raise tolls,
That's
right?
And you're talking about projects that would actually get cars off the road, like a brand new bus terminal, right? That would actually be a green project, more EV buses, more storage capacity, so you're not running empty buses back through this district. So that's a serious solution. Expanding access to the path, more scheduled hours for the path. You do those things, you get people out of their cars. That's a Port Authority mission. So to me, it's again just misguided.
If the highway administration fails to take you up on your request to redo or expand the environmental impact
Well, as I mentioned before, there's two bills that we're moving through Congress, and you probably are following. We're moving into the appropriations process, the budget process in Washington this fall. Sorry, I'll wait. Sorry. We're moving into the budget process, which happens in the fall, right, where the appropriations process happens. There's two pieces of legislation that we're moving. One, bipartisan, including representatives from New York. One says, if you move ahead, we're going to cut your federal money to the MTA. They get about $2 billion a year in federal resources. Why should we give them $2 billion a year in New Jersey? So taxpayers in New Jersey are helping pay for that. So we suggested they would lose those dollars. If they go ahead, we're proposing tax credits for commuters to help make up the gap. And we also proposed a full audit of the MTA to understand what they're doing with all the money we've given them and why they need more resources. Obviously, in the state, Governor Murphy has said they're looking at legal options. Again, I'll defer to the governor, his office on that, but that's also a potentiality to go on a legal route. All we're asking for of the federal government is to do a full environmental impact study to actually understand the real impacts on what we should do by the MTA's own admissions. What do we do to mitigate this environmental effect that the congestion tax would have on families and children? Right? Put alone all the other arguments about sticking it to Jersey families with an extra $5,000 a year tax. Put all that aside. We're just talking about the environmental impacts of that. Rob?
So for either one of you, with all the red flags in the environmental study, why do you think the DOT green-lighted it? And then if there is a full environmental study as you're calling for, how long do you think that would take? Is that just a way to delay congestion pricing?
On the first question on why they did it, it's a great question. I don't know. I think you should ask the Department of Transportation that and the Federal Highway Administration. We've been looking at ourselves all weekend saying given we've read this report 1,000 times, given what they outline in their own report, the MTA outlines in their own report, you would think it would automatically trigger a full environmental impact study. They're literally putting $100 million plus aside to deal with the negative environmental impacts on children and families. So that alone should be a huge red flag for DOT. I don't understand if they're just in the pocket of the governor in New York. I don't know what the deal is, but you should ask them. So we'll try to figure that out. Is this just, and to your second question, no, this is about actually understanding what this is going to do to children and families, the environment. If you look at our records, we believe deeply in protecting the environment, the air and water in the state of New Jersey. It's why we fight so hard for mass transit, fight so hard for pieces of legislation to help address the environment in our country, right? And the environment and climate change in our country. I think this is just one part that we really better get right, because once the horse is out of the barn and everyone's doing this process, it makes it much more difficult to put it back in. Well, it's about a year or so, but you should ask I would defer that question to the Department of Transportation, the Federal Highway Administration, because I think you could probably look up by precedent on different studies. One, but two, what's to stop them from going ahead anyway? I mean, they seem to be, as Rob pointed out, like despite all the facts on the table, despite the fact that they admit this is not going to help the environment or help traffic, you would hope that if the facts got out there and they were clear for everybody, right, that they would actually halt this project. We're all for more options on mass transit. If you want to invest more, which is one of the things that's interesting. Sorry, one of the things that I find most interesting is with the $1 billion a year they plan to make out of this, off the backs of Jersey families, they don't talk about anything to improve to expand mass transit options. Well, if they really care about reducing traffic and reducing congestion, wouldn't those dollars be allocated to actually expanding mass transit? We can't add more train service right now from Jersey into New York because there's not enough room on the platform in New York City where the trains pull into. We actually don't have capacity. The two tunnels, the Gateway train tunnels, are 100+ years old, 110 years old, and falling apart. We need to fix those. That's why we got resources, fought for and won resources in the bipartisan infrastructure bill to actually help build the Gateway train tunnels. But by the way, they're not built yet, right? So you actually have to build these things and do them. Then you can, if you want to look at things and implement some changes. But what do you do about people who have no mass transit options? We have a lot of towns where there's no bus options, there's no train options, there's literally no mass transit options. They have to drive. They have no choice.
Exactly.
Are you guys planning and sitting across the table and talking about this in New York?
I mean, I've spoken to John O'Lieber. I've talked to Governor Hochul. I know our governor, and that's, he's had many conversations, again, defer to him on the specifics. But we've been engaging with them in many ways. Rob was on the Port Authority. You're talking about, we've been having these conversations for an incredibly long time you've got Democrats and Republicans in the New York delegation who've talked and a New Jersey delegation who've spoken, right? So this conversation has been happening. They're just ignoring the facts and ignoring reality and just steamrolling ahead.
Exactly would be different about a full environmental impact statement versus the environmental study that's already happened. As a result, it produced several hundred pages documents. It's taken several years. The program has been delayed for several years already. So what difference would an EIS really know?
Well, one is cursory, one's the Cliff Notes, and one's a real version that goes into depth on every aspect of their findings. Maybe they're scared. I mean, I'm sure they're scared to find out, New York's MTA, actually what would be in the full environmental impact study, right? Like, God forbid it was ordered, how much worse it would be for those of us who care about the environment.
So I spoke to Diane Gutierrez-Machete yesterday, and she said that her office is reconsidering funding arrangements for bi-state projects in the wake of this decision. Do you support that, even if it potentially means delaying Gateway? If you had to make a choice, which is Gateway or congestion pricing, which is?
I think that's a false choice. And listen, I think the state right now is keeping all options on the table. I think that's the right position to take to re-engage New York in this conversation. But the idea that we're going to walk away from significant projects like Gateway, the fact that we're not going to walk away from doing things that produce better results for everyday transit riders. That's what we're about. We're about creating solutions and doing so in a collaborative way. But at this point, with where we are, New Jersey has to leave all cards on the table. I'm sure that's in the belief that the commissioner was taking that position from. But
Okay.
obviously will not speak for her.
We're good? Good. You guys good?
Good.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.